Hi guys, in this video lecture we will talk about one of the important part of the pituitary gland, that is the posterior pituitary gland, or you can say the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. As in the previous video lecture we have discussed about the development of pituitary glands, introduction to the pituitary gland, anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. In this video lecture we will discuss about the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now, before discussing the pituitary gland and its part and its function, we must have a short idea about the history of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So here are two scientists have a contribution to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The first one, that is Heinrich Obermeier. So this scientist, for the first time, he identified that the posterior lobes are actually, they have a neural origin. It means that this posterior lobe of the pituitary gland that are actually derived from the nervous system. So that's why they have a neural origins. And he also concluded that he also recognized that they have a connection to the hypothalamus. So this is the first scientist and its contribution to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Now the next one, that is Ernest Squirrels. So he discovered the neurosecretory cell in the hypothalamus. So actually this pituitary gland are actually attached, or it is actually the appendages that is lying below the hypothalamus. So inside the hypothalamus a specialized neurosecretory cell are present. Now this neurosecretory cell, it will secrete, or you can say it will produce the hormones, that is ADH and OXYTOCINs, that are actually secreted by these neurosecretory cells. So they will produce this hormone, and this hormone through a specialized tract it will come to the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. So these are the short history of the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now let us start the introduction to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So first of all, this posterior lobe, it is called as neurohypophysis. So the question is that why this lobe of the pituitary gland, it is called as neurohypophysis. And second name, that is, it is called as storage organ. Now let us discuss why this posterior lobe, it is called as neurohypophysis. This posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it is called as neurohypophysis because this posterior lobe, it is actually originated from the hypothalamus, which is the part of the nervous system. So that's why the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it is called as neurohypophysis. Now the second one, it is called as storage organs because this posterior lobe, it does not secrete any type of the hormones. So especially the hormone that are synthesized by the hypothalamus. So inside the hypothalamus, these neurosecretory cell, it will produce these hormones. Now this hormone, after the synthesis, it will store in the posterior lobes. So that's why this posterior lobe, it is called as storage organs. About 2 to 3 weeks these hormones are stored in the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. So if we talk about the development of this posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, so this is actually developed, or it is actually the evagination, or you can say the downgrowth of the diencephalons. So it is actually originated from the nervous systems. Now the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it is actually divided into three parts. The first one, that is infundibulum. The second one, that is median immense. The third one, that is pars nervosa. Now look at the structure of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So this is actually the overall structure of the hypothalamus. Now this hypothalamus, it is actually attached the posterior lobe through a stalk. Now this stalk through which the posterior lobe, this green, it actually show the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, while this black one, it indicate the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, as you can see here in the diagram of the pituitary glands. Now this posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it will attach with the hypothalamus through a stalk. Now this stalk, it is actually called as infundibulums. So this is the first part of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The next one, that is median immense. So median immense, actually that part of the posterior lobe which is present at the base of the hypothalamus. This is actually the infundibulum, while this one, it is actually the base of the infundibulum. Now here at the base of this region, it is actually median immense, it is actually the base of the infundibulums. So here the hypothalamus neuron, it will secrete the hormone into the blood capillary. So this is basically the median immense. The third important part of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, that is pars nervosa. So here it mainly contains the nerve fibers. Nerve fiber are present here. So this is mainly the three important part of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So here these are actually the secretory, neurosecretory cell of the hypothalamus. One is called as paraventricular nuclei, and the second one, that is supraoptic nuclei. Now next we will discuss how these neurohormones are synthesized in the hypothalamus and will come into the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Now this is actually the hypothalamus. Now this hypothalamus, it will contain a neurosecretory cells that is called as supraoptic nuclei, and the second one, that is paraventricular nuclei. As we know that the posterior lobe, it will release two hormones, that one of them is ADH and the second one, that is oxytocin. Now for this secretion of these two hormones, the neurosecretory cells are located in the hypothalamus, and these are supraoptic nuclei, and the second one, that is paraventricular nuclei. But before discussing the paraventricular nuclei and supraoptic nuclei, we must have an idea what is nuclei. So nuclei is, it is basically in the nervous system. Nuclei, it is used as a plural for the nucleus, but in case of the nervous system, a group of cell body inside the nervous system, it is called as nuclei. But in case of the peripheral nervous system, this group of cell body, it is called as ganglia. So what is ganglia and nuclei? These are actually the aggregation or group of the cell body, but they are different on their location. In case of the central nervous system, it is called as nuclei, but in case of the peripheral nervous system, it is called as ganglia. Now another term, that is flexes. So flexes are actually interconnected ganglia, are actually called as flexes, interconnected ganglia. These are basically called as flexes. Now these neurosecretory cell, or you can say the nuclei, it will synthesize or it will secrete the ADH hormones, while the paraventricular nuclei, it will secrete the oxytocins. Now along with the secretion of ADH and oxytocin, another binding protein are synthesized by these nuclei, and these protein molecule are binding protein molecule are called as neurophysin. Now here's two important neurophysin protein are secreted. Now one of them, that is neurophysin 2 and neurophysin 1. So along with the secretion of ADH supraoptic nuclei, it will secrete another binding protein that is called as neurophysin 2. Now this neurophysin 2, it will bind with the ADH molecules. Now it will carry this ADH into the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract systems. Now through the axonic flow, and here through the axonic flow, it will come into the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now when this neurophysin proteins, it will bind with the hormone ADH, so it will form a complex that is called as hormone physin complex. Now this physin, it will retain this ADH molecule and the granule before releasing into the bloodstream. Now when this ADH, it will release into the capillary, or you can say into the blood. So through enzymatic action, this neurophysin, it will release, and this ADH, it will come out and will go through the blood and reach into the target sites. The same process occur in case of the oxytocins. Now in this complex, it will move through the hypophyseal tract systems. Now through this system, it will come into the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands through the axonic flow. So by this way, the hormones are actually synthesized in the hypothalamus while stored inside the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So that's why these hormones that are ADH and oxytocin, these are basically called as neurohormones. So another reason for this posterior lobe, that is storage organ, because here these oxytocin and ADH that are stored here, so that's why it is called as storage organs. So in case of the mammals, the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it is absent in case of the whale and dolphins. So why this posterior lobe it is absent in these aquatic mammals? Because of the evolutionary adaptation to the environment, aquatic environment, so that's why they don't have a posterior lobes. So here's the two hormone, that is ADH and oxytocin, that are mainly released by the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now the function of ADH and oxytocin, that is mainly in case of the whale and dolphin, that are performed by some other hormones. So the first hormone ADH, so it is not essential for the water conservation, because these animals are found in a condition where there is abundant of water. So the conservation of water there is not necessary. So the ADH function, there is no function of the ADH in case of these whale and dolphin. The second one, that is oxytocin. So oxytocin, that are actually another hormone are produced in these dolphin and whales, that is called vasopressin. Now this vasopressin, it is actually a non-peptide hormones that are mainly released by the anterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now we will discuss the hormones that are mainly released by the posterior pituitary. So mainly two hormones are basically released by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The first one, that is ADH, and the second one, that is oxytocin. Now we will discuss here each of the hormone in detail and their functions. The first one, that is ADH. So ADH, it is abbreviated as antidiuretic hormones. While the other name used for the ADH, it is also called as ADH, it is also called as vasopressin, because it will constrict the blood vessel and will increase the blood pressure. So that's why it is called as vasopressins. So this hormone ADH, it is mainly secreted by the specialized cells, neurosecretory cell, and the hypothalamus, that is called as supraoptic nuclei. So if we look to the structure of this ADH, so they are mainly composed of 9 amino acids. So this is a short introduction of the ADH. So mainly it's composed of 9 amino acids and mainly secreted by the supraoptic nuclei. And a little bit history of the ADH. So Milton Green determined the ADH chemical structure for the first time. It was identified by the Milton Green in 1959, while Ernest Sterling, he coined the term ADH to these hormones. Now what is the function of ADH? So ADH mainly it will perform two important functions. The first one, that is retention of water. The second one, that is vasopressor actions. So on the basis of these two action, this ADH hormone, it is called as antidiuretic hormones and vasopressin hormones. Now we will discuss how this ADH it will responsible for the retention of water in the bodies. Now the first function of the antidiuretic hormone, that is the retention of waters. So this hormone, it will act on the nephron and will retain water in the body. Now look at the structure of the nephron that mainly constitute the kidney. So this is actually the structure of atypical nephrons. Now this part of a cuff-like structure or part of the nephron, it is called as Bowman capsules. While this tubules, or you can say the small channels, this is called as proximal convoluted tubules, while these tubes are actually called as loop of Henle, while this part of the nephron, it is called as distal convoluted tubules, while the final part of the nephron, this is called as collecting ducts. Now how this ADH, it will retain waters. So here's the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting duct that are actually impermeable to waters. Now when this ADH, it is released, so here's right at the distal convoluted tubule. So here the epithelium of this distal convoluted tubule, it will contain a receptor that are mainly responsible for the ADH receptor, or you can say this is the ADH receptors. Now these receptors are actually called as V2 receptors. Now when ADH, it will attach with the V2 receptor, so it will activate adenyl cyclase. Then cyclic AMP, it is activated, and through a series of reactions, so here's aquaporine channels are often in the collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubules, through which the water are removed from the nephron and enter into the blood capillaries. So by this way, it will retain water in the bodies. So this is the first function of the ADH, that how this ADH, it will retain water in the bodies. A disorder that are mainly related to the ADH, that is called as diabetes insipidus. One of the condition, that is diabetes mellitus, which is mainly related to the release of the sugar and the urine, that is called as diabetes mellitus. But this condition, it is diabetes insipidus, and this condition, it is basically related to the low secretion of ADH. So when low secretion of the ADH, it will occur, so the water molecule are actually removed from our body in the form of urines. So in this case, excessive urination occur in case of the diabetes insipidus. So the person start excreting 12 to 15 liter of dilute urine. So when no reabsorption of the water occur in the distal and convoluted tubule and the collected duct, so excessive water are removed from our body. Now here in a day, 12 to 15 liter of the urine are excreted by the persons. So the persons also suffer from dehydration as the excessive water are removed from the body. So the condition, dehydration condition, also appear in the individual. Nausea, vomiting, and headaches. So these are the condition mainly related to the diabetes insipidus. Now the next function of the ADH, that is vasopressor actions. Now what is vasopressor action? So basically when the ADH, they are released from the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. So right at the blood vessels, the receptor for the ADH, they are located. Now the receptor for this ADH, it is called as V1A receptor. So the receptor that are responsible for the ADH. So when these receptors are activated, so it will cause the contractions, and contraction of the blood vessel occur in all part of the body. So when the blood vessel that actually shortens in length, so or simply you can say that they are constricted. So when the blood vessel, they are actually constricted, so suppose this is the blood vessels. Now right in this blood vessel, the receptor V1A receptor are located. So when this receptor are activated by the ADH, so it will cause the contraction, of the blood vessel, due to which the blood vessel are contracted. So at the result, what happen? So basically it will increase the blood pressure in the blood vessels. So this is the second function of the ADH. But this action, it is actually not prominent as compared to the retention of water, which is very important in the bodies. Now the next hormone that are basically secreted by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, that is called as oxytocins. Now oxytocin, it is also known as love hormone because they are responsible for the bonding of mothers and babies. So that's why it is called as love hormones. So that's why it is called as love hormone. So basically right at the hypothalamus, some nuclei that is called as paraventricular nuclei are located. Now this paraventricular nuclei, they are actually responsible for the secretion of oxytocin, while the supraoptic nuclei, they are responsible for the secretion of ADH. Now in this paraventricular nuclei, it will synthesize the oxytocin. So now this oxytocin, after the synthesis, they are stored in the posterior lobe. So when the needs occurs, now this posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it will secrete the oxytocin. Now if we talk about the structure of oxytocin, so basically it is made from the 9 amino acids. Now this oxytocin, it is secreted both in the male and female, so they have different function in the male and female. So let us discuss the function of oxytocin in male and females. Now first of all, we will discuss the function of oxytocin in female. So in case of the female, this oxytocin, it will act different on different cases. So in case of the pregnant uterus, in case of the non-pregnant uterus, the function of oxytocin, it is different. Let us discuss in case of the pregnant uterus. Now in this case, when the baby, they are actually present in the uterus, so when the birth of the baby occurs, so at this stage, this head of the baby, it will touch the cervix. Now the receptor for the oxytocin, it is located in the uterus. So increase the level of oxytocin, it will increases, so it will cause the contraction of the uterus, due to which the cervix are dilated and the birth canal are formed. At the end, the birth of the baby occurs. So this process, it is called as parturition. So they play important role in the birth of the baby. So this is the first function in case of the pregnant uterus. Now what is the function of this oxytocin and non-pregnant uterus? So a non-pregnant uterus, it will facilitate the transport of the sperm through the female genital tract up to the fallopian tubes. So right when the sperm are entered into the body of female, so here's the transport of the sperm from the vagina region or cervix region up to the fallopian tube, so it will done with the help of this oxytocin, because it will cause the contraction of these smooth muscles found in the genital tract. Now what is the function in case of the male? So basically this oxytocin, it is also secreted in the male, and it will perform important function, and their function that is discussed here. So basically right at the reproductive tract, or the, you can say, the genital tract, the smooth muscle are present in this genital tract. Now the contraction of this smooth muscle, it will facilitate the transport of the sperm into the urethra. Now when this oxytocin, it will secreted, it will cause the contraction of this smooth muscle, due to which the sperm are released into the urethra. So this is the basic function in case of the male. So this is overall about the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Thank you so much.